When his wife paused and looked at him, John replied, "I understand." John thought that he had been saying "I understand" a lot the last few days, and he was really tired of saying those words. He wondered how he and Diane, his wife, had ever gotten to this point. They had been married for over 22 years, had 2 wonderful children, both in college. They lived in a lovely old house that Diane had inherited from her grandmother. Together they had remodeled the house, adding a pool and a detached garage. The old house now had an open-concept floor plan and a beautifully updated kitchen. He was proud of the house and thought it rivaled anything they had seen on HGTV. They also had a great beach house in Hatteras, North Carolina. He resisted making any changes to the traditional beach house he inherited, preferring to leave it as he remembered it as a child. It was the site of so many wonderful family memories. John Simon Thomas was now Senior Vice President of Central Logistics and was enjoying the fruits of years of hard work. Diane Anderson Thomas also excelled in her career. She was a senior account executive at the securities firm Richards & Son, having worked there for the past 20 years. He thought they had the perfect home, near-perfect children, a wonderful career, and a happy marriage, until he often said, "I understand," but knew he didn't really understand what was going on with his life. Diane is silent and looks at him. "You understand what I'm trying to say?" "I understand." He hoped she hadn't noticed the mark he'd made on the piece of paper in front of him. He looked at the piece of paper. 32 marks. He had said, "I understand," to his wife 32 times in the last 2 days. It was time to put an end to this debate. "So we finally agree," Diana said. "I'm going to step outside our marriage once to experience this." She stopped when she saw John shaking his head. John looked Diana in the eyes and replied, "I will never cheat on you, and I will never agree to you cheating on me." "I have never cheated on you," Diane exclaimed. John continued, "I'm willing to forgive the cheating you've done up to this point, but that's it now." "I never cheated on you," Diana replied defiantly. "Yes, you have cheated, at least in my opinion, and if you are honest in your thinking, you know it. You've had dinner alone with him several times. He has met you several times on girls' night out and turned those evenings into actual dates. You kept up an extensive text message correspondence with him, especially on weekends." John paused and looked deep into her eyes, causing Diana to lower her head. He now had reservations for an upscale room at the Jefferson Hotel and 2 seats for their Sunday brunch. His intentions are obvious. "You have a bold new dress tucked away in the depths of your closet. A Victoria's Secret bag filled with new lingerie. I assume for his eyes only, since you've hidden it from me. Your intentions are also obvious." John paused and waited for a response, which never came. He continued, "I'm going to make this very simple. I'm going to make sure we both understand what needs to happen. I'm going to propose 2 options. I'm going to the beach house this Saturday morning. I'm going to stop for breakfast at the Virginia Diner, and then I'm going to go to the beach. I would love for you to come with me. We can spend the weekend talking about our problems and wondering if we can save our marriage. It would be nice if you could return the underwear you bought for him and pick up something for us to have some fun." John paused, trying to gauge Diana's reaction. Once again, he couldn't read her mind, something he'd never had a problem with until recently. "Your other option is to go ahead with your plans for Saturday. Go to meet David Summers at the Jefferson Hotel, have a nice romantic dinner at Bookbinders, dance at the Tobacco Company Club, and return to the Jefferson to make your novel complete. Look at me." She raised her head slowly. "You can go ahead with your plans. You won't need my permission because the moment I leave without you on Saturday morning, our marriage will be over." Diana looked at John dumbfounded. How did he know about their weekend plans? She slowly began to speak. Before she could utter a word, John said, "In case you're wondering, I have friends where you work. You have friends at work who care about you. And finally, David Summers has no real friends at all." Diane paused as what John had told her came through to her. Then she tried to go on the offensive. "I have been a faithful wife and partner to you for 22 years. "No, you've been a faithful wife for 21 years and 10 months. You've been cheating on me since your first lunch with David Summers." "I never cheated on you," Diana pleads. "You've already had sex with him," John started to say. Diane jumped up and interrupted him. "I never cheated on you!" With a sadness that surprised Diane, John continued. "I saw the cheating in your eyes, eyes that were always fixed on mine when we made love, eyes that now close, a face that turns away from my gaze in bed. How many times were you with him when we made love?" John laughed sadly. "We used to fantasize about a threesome with another woman or another man. I'm assuming you've already been able to fulfill that fantasy. For the past few months, we've had an overcrowded bed. Now I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Do you understand?" Diana thought things were not going the way she had planned. She tried to get the upper hand. "John, we have a wonderful marriage. I value our relationship and your love more than anything. We've raised 2 wonderful children together. We have great careers, and if we stay on track, we can retire early and truly enjoy life and each other. I have been faithful to you and am ready to be by your side as a loving wife for the rest of our lives. I will give you the rest of my days. I only need 1 day for me." "And 1 night for him," was John's quick reply. Diana lowered her eyes and shook her head. She looked at John. "I could have just gone behind your back. I could have lied to you, but I wanted to be upfront and honest with you. I thought after all these years you would understand." John replied quickly again. "I understand. And as far as lying and going behind my back, that's exactly what you've been doing for the last few months. You've been going on dates with him under the guise of a bachelorette party. You've had intimate dinners with him, holding hands and letting his hands roam your body that only I should have access to. And worst of all, you brought him into our bedroom, replacing me with thoughts of him. You let him interfere with our time with hundreds of texts, not to mention sexting. Diane, I know everything, and how I found out doesn't matter. What is important is that you understand what I'm talking about. Do you understand?" Diana just looked at him with eyes he no longer understood. He sighed quietly, realizing that she didn't understand what she was throwing away. John got up and left the room. He went to their bedroom, brushed his teeth, and tried to sleep, but he knew it would be difficult to fall asleep this night. Diane sat motionless for several minutes. Finally, she moved to the couch, picked up the phone, and called her friend Janice. When Janice answered, Diane said, "John knows everything. He knows about David and our plans for this weekend." Janice replied, "That doesn't sound good. Please tell me you're going to cancel it." Diane replied quietly, "I don't know how I can. I promised David, and he spent so much money on this weekend." Janice quickly replied, "You made promises to John before. If you don't remember, I do. I was your maid of honor. Summers can call the whole thing off, and it won't cost him a penny. Anyway, that's no reason to cheat on John." "I'm not cheating on John," Diana said again. "You are cheating," Janice replied. "When I told you about what George and I did, I was trying to make sure you understood that I would never do it without his permission. Also, I told you that we picked out a man together and made sure it was someone we would never see again. I told you that we did everything right, but yet we still have issues we are trying to work out. You decided to sleep with a coworker, and you're trying to make excuses for it." Now Janice was begging. "Please forget this plan. Stop seeing David, get on your knees, and apologize to John." Diane replied softly, "But I need that. I really need to experience another man once more in my life. David is a nice guy, and the women at work say he's good in bed." "A nice guy wouldn't sleep with a married woman," Janice stated. "Think about what you're risking just to become another notch on his bedpost." "I'm not going to be another notch on his bedpost. He's paying attention to me." Janice wanted to scream into the phone. "Don't you realize that's even worse? I met David at our bachelorette party. He's a good-looking man, but he's nowhere near what John is. You have to realize that, don't you?" "I understand," Diane whispered. Janice pleaded, "Please think long and hard about your decision. It will affect all the people you love for the rest of your life." Diane said quietly, "I thought you would understand. I thought you, of all people, would understand why I needed to do this." Janice tried to reach her friend one more time. Diane, the problem isn't that I don't understand. The problem isn't that John doesn't understand. The problem isn't that your kids or your parents or your friends won't understand. The problem is that you don't understand. I'm begging you not to do this, Diana replied in a determined voice. Well, John knows what I've been doing up to this point, and he hasn't stopped me. He won't like it, but he will let me do it. He'll realize how important it is to me, and now I need to get some sleep. Finished talking, Janice turned to her husband, George. She didn't understand a word of what I told her. I am so sorry I told her about our experience. George replied, I thought we agreed that it would remain strictly between us. Janice was somewhat embarrassed. I needed to talk to someone about the problems we were having. I never thought it would give her any ideas. George put his arm around Janice and said, I know, and I'm not mad. I have to admit I've talked to John about our problems too. Janice lowered her head in obvious embarrassment. You told John. I can imagine how he reacted. Did he suggest kicking me to the curb or branding me a whore on my forehead? I thought you knew John better than that. He asked me a series of questions. My answers to those questions made me think about us. After I finished answering his questions, he said to me, You two got into this together. You made this decision together. It turned out to be a big mistake, but you two did it together, and only you two can fix that mistake. As long as we continue to be together, to work on our relationship together, everything will be okay. He made me realize that we were in this together and we were both trying to work out our issues. That could be the reason we are still married. Janice started to cry. She said quietly, This could be the reason we're married, and we could be the reason he's getting a divorce. George shook his head as he hugged his wife. Don't blame yourself if they split up. John is right. If they don't work it out together, they won't stand a chance. Diane slid into bed and realized John was awake. He turned his back to her, and they both moved to opposite edges of the bed. 2 feet separated them, but the distance seemed to be measured in miles. They got up on the alarm clock and went about their morning chores without saying a word to each other. After Diane left for work, John relaxed for a moment and checked the list he held in his hands. He had taken today and Monday off from work. John went through every room in the house, taking pictures of each room and its contents. He cataloged the contents of each room and marked the items he wanted to keep. He copied all of their wedding and family photos from the cloud onto a flash drive. He left their wedding album on the coffee table, not daring to open it. The apartments he looked at were nice, but he knew he would miss this house. He would keep all the wonderful memories, but he would miss being here. He would miss the woman he couldn't stop loving and the life they had built together here. John went to see Sandra Lewis, who had been highly recommended to him. The settlement she proposed was very simple and straightforward. Diane would get the house and her retirement plan. John will keep the beach house and his retirement plan. He would pay off her car and all credit cards. A portion of their investment accounts would be set aside for college tuition and $10,000 for each child as a charitable fund. Then they would split the remaining funds 50-50. John looked up after reviewing the settlement offer and just nodded his head. Sandra said, We can file the papers on Wednesday morning. John nodded once more, stood up, shook her hand, and walked out of the office. Sandra Lewis realized that her client had said very few words to her since he had hired her for his divorce. All of their communication had been done via email. She sensed sadness and humility in him. Sometimes she wondered why she had chosen family law as her major. John headed to the bank. He opened a separate account, transferring half of the old account to his new one. He emailed a direct deposit change form to his company's human resources department. Later, at home, he would change his payments to his new bank account. He then went to their investment banker. The man confirmed that both of their signatures would be required for all invoices and transfers. John informed him that his attorney, Sandra Lewis, would seize those accounts the day after Diane was served. John was disgusted by the look of pity and concern on the faces of his longtime advisors. He realized that they were just the first of their many acquaintances who would have the same look on their faces when the news got out. The thought of having to tell his children about the divorce almost made him nauseous. Diane tried to avoid David Summers at work as much as possible. On their lunch break, they met at Maria's Cafe, a small restaurant he liked to call their place. She was quiet and refused to hold his hand. John was aware of their every move. She couldn't shake the feeling she'd had all day that they were being watched. David Summers paid no attention to Diana's mood. "I'm excited about this weekend. Check-in at the hotel is at 3 p.m. Do you think we could have met a little earlier than planned? Maybe we could have a little fun in the room before going to dinner?" "I don't think so," was Diana's subdued reply. Back in the office, Diana tried to do something but kept looking around the office. She realized that at least one, maybe several of her co-workers were acting as spies for John. After a couple of fruitless hours, she closed up for the day and left the office. Walking down the hallway, Diana said hello to two new interns in her department. She stopped and looked back at the interns. She couldn't help but notice the distinctive Central Logistics logo on the sweatshirt worn by one of them. John had completed all the tasks on his list. It was 2 p.m., and he realized he hadn't eaten all day, so he decided to grab a bite to eat. When he sat down at a table at Maria's cafe, the hostess came out and greeted him with a hug. John gave her a big hug and asked, "How is Ben doing?" Maria smiled. "He's doing great. He made the baseball team as a freshman. He is so excited. You know James has been a great practice partner this winter. Your son has changed everything." "Well, James is thrilled to have his roommate on the team with him," John replied. Maria sat down next to John and said, "They were here for lunch again today, but all was not well in paradise. Diane was very nervous, and of course Summers didn't understand anything." "He may be clueless, but he's going to sleep with her this weekend," replied a dejected John. "Don't be in a hurry to give up on her. She must be a special woman since you've been married for so long. She will realize her mistake, and I just pray it happens sooner rather than later," Maria replied. "So, Maryland-style crab cakes with broccoli?" John smiled for the first time that day. "Sounds perfect, and maybe a beer for a change. Surprise me with one of your pale ales." Diane got home early and began to put her backup plan in motion. She planned to cook John's favorite dinner and then try to talk to him again. It was important to her that he agree to her one-time date. If he wouldn't agree to it, she needed him to at least accept her actions. When the crab cakes were baked, she went upstairs and changed her clothes. She wanted to look good for him, and then she planned to meet Janice and her other friend Lisa for a drink and one last discussion about the big day on Saturday. She pulled the Victoria's Secret clothes and bags out of her closet and walked to her car, placing them carefully in the trunk of her car. She didn't want to embarrass John or herself by flaunting them in front of him. John arrived home at his usual time and was surprised to hear the smell of dinner cooking. Diane entered the living room and handed him a bottle of light beer. "Please take off your jacket and tie and have a seat. Dinner will be on the table in a couple minutes." John smiled at the sight of the Maryland-style crab cakes and steamed broccoli she brought him. He was glad, as it was his favorite meal, but for the first time he realized that he would have preferred to eat at Maria's cafe. At this point, he would rather be anywhere but home. As they dined in silence, Diane decided to try again to make him understand why she needed to do this. "John, I love you, and I pray you understand why." John interrupted her. "I understand. You look really good today. Are you going out?" John: "Yeah, I'm going to meet up with Janice and Lisa for a couple drinks later tonight. But I'm trying to tell you that I love you and I'm hoping for you." Yeah, you hope I understand," John said coldly. "I do understand." He stopped eating and moved away from the table. Standing up, he said, "I've lost my appetite." Leaving, he said to her, "You look very good for him. I guess you couldn't wait until tomorrow. When you see David Summers tonight, tell him to drop dead for me." John disappeared into the living room, and the sound of the television filled the dining room. Diana sat quietly at the table, wrapping her arms around her head. For the first time, she seriously reconsidered her actions. After a few minutes, she stood up and cleared the table. Now was not the time to hesitate. She needed to stay true to her feelings. She texted Janice, "Can we meet earlier? I'm leaving in 5 minutes." John heard the front door open and close. He sipped his beer and looked at the TV. He realized he had been sitting there for 20 minutes and had no idea what channel he was watching. He felt the sadness pressing down on his chest like a huge weight that made it almost impossible for him to breathe. John pulled a box out of his coat pocket. He popped 2 pills into his mouth and chugged them down with the rest of his beer. For the first time in his life, he was taking sleeping pills. He knew he couldn't fall asleep without help. He also knew he would need all his strength for Saturday morning. Diane was the first to walk up to the bar and order a table for 3. As she waited, she turned her attention to the scene at the bar. Men and women were dancing a dance of seduction, but to Diana it seemed like a dance of desperation and loneliness. Was this really her destiny? What saved her from these thoughts was the appearance of her friends. Diana watched her 2 friends approach the table. She noticed that they seemed tense and prepared herself for their attack. Lisa sat down and looked at Diana. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Are you out of your mind? Are you going to cheat on your husband with some piece of shit bastard from work? Are you going through menopause, or have you started taking drugs or fallen and hit your head? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard anyone say, and I used to think you were one of the smartest people I know. If you go for it, you must be the dumbest bitch I've ever met." Diana simply replied to her friend, "Good evening to you too, Lisa. Yeah, I'm fine. How about you?" Lisa just looked at her. Diane could see the anger and hurt in her eyes. Diane turned to Janice. "Your turn." Janice shook her head. "You know how I feel about this adventure of yours? I'd say more, but I'm afraid I can't be as polite as Lisa." Diana smiled sadly. "You think you could swear better than Lisa?" Janice replied without a smile. "Well, no one can cuss better than Lisa, but she missed the words bitch, slut, cheater, adulteress, idiot, and probably the worst of all disappointments. But there is one thing I really need to tell you. I think you're planning to make the biggest mistake of your life, but I love you and I'll be here to help you no matter what you do." Lisa just shook her head. Shit. What you want to do is so wrong and so stupid. But I'll be here for you too. Just so you know, I'll be saying, 'I told you so' over and over again." Diana hugged her friends. "Thank you for your love. I know you can't support what I'm doing, but it's wonderful to know that I can count on you both after this. You both know that I don't do anything half-assed. I've made a commitment, and it's time for me to see this thing through to its natural conclusion." Lisa pleaded softly, "Diana, there is nothing natural about cheating, and commitment to cheating is the opposite of the true meaning of the word commitment." Diana sat quietly for a few moments, then stood up and said, "I need to finish my business for tomorrow. I will bring a bottle of wine. Please stay and drink to me." Diana did her errands and drove up to the dark house. She gathered her thoughts and then sent Janice a long text message. She knew Janice was angry with her, but she also knew her friend would help her. She opened the trunk of her car. She realized she couldn't leave her purchases in the car overnight. It would be too cold to wear them tomorrow. She stashed them in the closet in the hallway downstairs. After that, she slid into bed next to John and tried to sleep. Sleep did not come to Diane that night. Finally, at 3 a.m., she got out of bed and went downstairs. She saw the wedding album on the coffee table and thought that if John could look at their wedding album, so could she. After looking through 2 pages, she closed the album and cried. She had to make him understand. At 5 a.m., she gave up the thought of sleep and went to the bathroom to take a shower. After showering, she put on some of her underwear from VS and then opened her garment bag and put on the pretty thing that was in it. She took out the suitcase she had packed earlier and carried it to the car. She then placed the Victoria's Secret bag next to the suitcase. She walked to the kitchen and wrote a short note to John. She chuckled to herself. She was leaving him a letter from Dear John. She put the note on the coffee maker, turned off the light, and walked to the car, determined to finish what she had started. John woke up and looked at his alarm clock. It was 6:15, and when he turned around, he realized he was sleeping alone. The thought crossed his mind that she hadn't waited up for tonight. He pushed her over to David Summers. He imagined her lying in David Summers' bed, and the image struck him to the core. For the first time, he overestimated himself. Should he have just let her have one night to experience another man? She had promised to belong only to him after that one night. Had he lost the happiness of a lifetime because of his ego and pride? Reflecting on his plight, John realized he could never love her again if she went to David Summers. He could live with her putting her children first because that's what a mother should do. but he could never live with her putting another man above her husband. In 22 years, they had both earned each other's respect and devotion. She expected nothing less. He would accept nothing less. He hoped she was home. Maybe she was sleeping in one of the other bedrooms. John checked all the bedrooms and found no sign of her coming home this night. Entering the kitchen, he saw a note on the coffee maker. He opened the letter and read the short note. "Please understand," was all she had written. Falling back into one of the kitchen chairs, John cried. He dreaded it, but deep down he still expected her to stay, to forget this crazy idea, to remain his wife. Making coffee, he went upstairs. He took a quick shower and got dressed, then stuffed a duffel bag with some clothes and went downstairs. John filled his thermos with coffee and headed for the front door. Taking one last long look at the house that was his home, he turned off the light and closed the door. The cold morning air hit his face as he walked down the steps. He had forgotten to start his car, but he thought the cold would help him wake up and maybe bring him out of whatever stupor he was feeling. As he walked to his car, he realized the motor was running. He opened the back door, and as he was putting his bag inside, he saw a suitcase and a Victoria's Secret bag in the back seat. In the passenger seat, he saw Diane sleeping in the car. He quietly closed the back door and stopped, reaching for the door handle. He cried tears of joy at the sight of his wife, his love. Now he knew they had a chance. John took a deep breath and opened the car door. As he got into the car, Diane moved and looked up at John. "Good morning," she whispered quietly, wiping her eyes. "Good morning." After a short pause, he asked, "How long have you been here?" Diana looked at her watch and replied, "About 2 hours. I couldn't sleep, and then I was worried you were leaving without me, so I decided to wait in the car. I put gas in the car and bought us a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts for the road." John opened the box of donuts and said, "There are only 7 donuts here." Diane finally woke up and replied, "A dozen was for 2, and I've already eaten my share." Smiling, John grabbed one of the donuts and let it melt in his mouth. "Yeah, this would hold me over until we had breakfast at the Virginia diner. How do you like their country ham and cream cookies?" Diana shook her head. "I'm not dressed to go to Virginia's diner." John was confused. "Diane, there is no dress code at Virginia's diner. You can wear anything you want there." Diane smiled. "I know you can wear almost anything, but you can't not wear almost anything." As she finished speaking, she unzipped her coat to show John a purple set of underwear. "Well, it's almost nothing," John agreed. "Is the coat new?" Diana replied, "Yes, I changed my dress for this gorgeous coat. Just in case you haven't checked the Victoria's Secret bag, I returned that one, the other underwear, and bought these things especially for you." Diana put her hand on his chin and lifted his head so he could look into her eyes. "This outfit and the body underneath are for your eyes, and your eyes alone for all the days and nights of our lives." After a brief pause, she continued, "I'm sorry for the hell I put you through these past months. You were right about almost everything. There were only 2 things you were wrong about. Last night I dressed up for you and no one else, and I did get to meet Janice and Lisa. The second thing you were wrong about was that when we had sex, I had sex with David. David never entered our bedroom. I didn't close my eyes to think about him, but I couldn't look you in the eye because I was so ashamed of what I wanted to do. I'm ashamed to admit that the shame I felt didn't stop me from planning to be with him." She looked at him and said quietly, "Now I really understand." He kissed her. They had a lot to talk about. They had a lot of work to do to rebuild their marriage, but his heart jumped with joy when he realized she finally understood. Driving past the Virginia diner, John looked over at Diane. She had fallen asleep again shortly after they reached the highway. He remembered all the things he had done on Friday. They had a lot to talk about, and he realized that any honest conversation had to include his confession. John remembered that night 7 years ago. He was in San Francisco for a quarterly corporate meeting. He had been a department head at the time, and his venture had paid huge dividends for the company. Foreign companies were buying up their American competitors, but John saw an interesting opportunity. He championed the idea of buying an Italian company with excellent engineers but serious money problems. His mentor, the CEO, approved the purchase, and it was a great success. The purchase brought them several teams of experienced engineers. A big plus was the access to the European market that this company gave the rest of the corporation, and the Italian company's strong presence in the Chinese market. The deal eventually brought in billions of dollars. It was the crowning achievement of the CEO's career and put John on the fast track to an accelerated corporate career. Diane was home in Virginia that evening with the boys at a high school band concert, so John was celebrating his success with his co-workers, and especially with Debbie Maris, a fine marketing representative from another division. Debbie and he had a long-term business relationship of the friendly flirt type. He drank just enough to loosen his inhibitions, but not enough to lower his libido. They danced much closer than a married man should with someone other than his wife. She pressed herself against his leg and rubbed his erection through his pants. When she put her panties into his open palm, they headed for her suite. In the elevator, they kissed and caressed each other. He released her breasts. Debbie tossed him her blouse and bra before the elevator door opened, and they walked quickly to her suite. He watched as she unzipped her skirt and, standing naked in the opening doorway, reached for his hand. But John couldn't move. He realized that it was physically impossible for him to enter this room. He knew his erection had left him. For the first time in hours, he thought of his wife and the wonderful family he had at home. He looked at the beautiful Debbie Maris and couldn't think of any reason to enter the room. He retreated 2 steps and then ran, literally ran, back to the elevator. He went into his room and showered, wanting to get rid of Debbie's odor. It was 1 o'clock in the morning at their house in Richmond, but he called Diane. He needed to hear her voice. After a few beeps, she sleepily picked up the phone. John assured Diane that he was fine, and nothing bad had happened, and then told her the good news. He told her of the success of his venture and a promotion with a huge raise. He cried as she excitedly told him how proud she was of him and how she always knew he would succeed. She told him how much she loved him. Through his tears, he realized that he had almost shared one of the greatest moments of his life with the wrong woman. Diana's opinion and happiness was all that mattered to him. As John drove to the beach, he knew he had to tell her. He had to make her understand why he really understood her feelings. He was in her shoes, and that was why he could listen to her and honestly say, "I understand." Once Diana morally fully returned to the family, David Summers ceased to be of any interest to her, John, or the author. But inquiring minds want to know this. Epilogue. David Summers sat alone in Fred Davis's office at Richards & Sons. Fred was vice president of human resources, and David had been sent to his office as soon as he walked in that Monday morning. He didn't realize why he was here. Okay, he'd recently missed a couple of deadlines in the process of pursuing Diane, but he felt he could catch up quickly. The meeting had thrown his plans for this morning into disarray. He needed to talk to Diana about what had happened over the weekend. Not only had she set him up, but she had sent 2 of her friends, Janice and Lisa, to tell him about it. David remembered how afraid he had been of this woman, Lisa. His father had been in the Navy for 25 years, but he was no match for the way this woman could swear. She embarrassed him right there in the lobby of the Jefferson Hotel. He remembered that even the hotel security seemed afraid to interfere. As he turned to go back to his seat, he froze when he saw the photograph on Fred Davis's desk. It was a family portrait of Fred, his 3 sons, and his smiling wife. He now knew the last name of the woman who had so thoroughly berated him, Lisa Davis. Now he realized why he was here.